What's anything you've seen that no one else believes? I'm not sure how many people I've told this to, but genuinely, I can understand why. When I was about 8 years old, my cousin and I were on vacation in Europe, and we were at the zoo when she gave me some helium sharks balloon when we were getting into the car, and for some reason, I let go of it, watching it float away into the sky. I was devastated, and I tried to forget about it. About 2 weeks later, I continued my vacation and traveled 700 kilometers to my mom's village on the first day of my vacation. When I was approximately 10, they began posting missing children on milk cartons. I found my shark balloon floating into my own backyard while we were on a walk around the land at my mom's family's house. For a long time, I would glance at this boy's face on the milk side as I ate my cereal every morning. One day, as I was playing outside, a car drove by, and a youngster in the back seat had his face close to the window, gazing out. I'm nearly certain I informed my parents that it was the boy on the milk carton, but they didn't believe me. I had a similar experience when I was 5 or 6 years old and playing outdoors with other kids, when those two cars suddenly pulled up to the sidewalk, grabbed a girl riding a tricycle, and drove off, leaving only her bike, and we hurried to my mother to inform her that someone had been abducted. She was cooking a little, and I heard her nod and smile, and that was the last thing I thought about her. It's absurd that they wouldn't simply ask more questions rather than call the police right away. I even remembered some of the license plate numbers, so I raced to my mom and was shocked that she did nothing. However, you never know what they could need to solve a kidnapping or anything else, so you should be careful with whatever information you provide them. In eastern Poland in the late 1980s, there was a distinct approach to the police and children. We were allowed to travel freely from dawn till dusk without anyone watching. I was surf fishing at night with a friend when I was around 15. At that time, a hurricane was brewing in the south, so Jersey it was really choppy on the shore tonight, and we saw lights come up over the ocean and travel toward the shore. It was rotating, so we could determine how quickly it was spinning by the lights along its edge. It approached us and hovered a few hundred feet offshore as the light began to appear. It began to accelerate, going slowly northward while spinning faster and faster, and then it simply shot off at a crazy rate of speed. After it eventually vanished above Barnegat Lighthouse, we returned to check our poles, but as soon as we began reeling in our lines, they needed about 3 ounces of weight since we were using striper LS, and there were lures on the beach about 30 yards down the beach behind us. This way, when we cast, the wind would not blow them back behind us and into the beach. I also recall that the time was 11:30 by the time we cast. He killed himself a year and a half ago, so I can't receive any credit for the 5 hours we spent fishing down there. We used to talk about it constantly when he would come visit the shore house, and my parents would just laugh at us. Additional information, but I will always remember it as one of my favorite memories of him. Rest in peace, Jay. In the 1990s, I was a huge exercise enthusiast, walking and climbing hills for at least 4 hours every day. I was missing out on news, TV, and current affairs. Driving home at approximately 3 p.m., this guy with messy hair is standing at the end of his garments as I cross the street. In front of our neighborhood grocery shop are scattered everywhere, not torn, but jumbled as if he had stepped out of a bomb blast, but he's cleaner. Discreetly scanning the scene, obviously bewildered, and supposed to be a couch surfer rather than a street sleeper since he looked too good to be a street sleeper, and he didn't appear to know where he was. But he turned left and wandered off to my left before I crossed the street that evening. That day, local news reported that a school teacher drowned a few towns away, and they displayed his photo. This blew up more than I anticipated, and I'll try to respond to as many of the comments as I can. I didn't go to the police because I didn't trust my feelings when I saw the guy, and I honestly forgot that they never recovered his body. The street was packed with people, and nobody was responding to him at all. The whole situation had a humorous vibe, and this isn't a place where that's always a good idea. At the time, I was actually quite bashful because he wasn't wet, but he was looking really astonished and confused. I'd be stunned if he had staged his death, but based on all I've heard and seen, he was a good man. I was a witness in an assault case, and it has had serious life repercussions for me with little end for the victim. I'm sorry, but I don't have any further answers. This story haunted me because if they didn't discover a body, how did they declare it a drowning? He was fishing with friends when they witnessed him go overboard. I hope you called the police since it's completely. That man might have been the teacher. Usually when a person drowns and their body isn't found, it's left there because that's the last thing they were doing or were observed doing. However, the man might not have drowned, but rather experienced some other strange situation. Event following his water activities. For over 25 years, a friend's father worked as a recovery diver. On numerous occasions, people who were thought to have drowned while boating, diving, swimming, etc., were discovered lost, confused, and traumatized far away. Downstream, divers frequently disappear hours or days later, and cave divers in particular frequently have their bodies not found for months or years. In one case, the remains of the divers are presumed to be in their final known location. My friend and I were watching basketball in the early days when Hader's death occurred. He had some kind of medical problem while diving into the lake and managed to escape the water and enter the tree line a few meters above the coast before passing away. As they were heading to the commercial, we both heard panelist Charles Barkley apologize for calling a team of midgets and add besides, "They shouldn't hate me. They should hate God," which he said on a hot mic. We were shocked and certain he would be fired, but not only did we never hear about it again, but the video isn't even available online. It seems like we had delusions. It's strange since yesterday I was reading a discussion about satellite TV from the past. Gather the satellite feeds that are sent to local TV stations. For example, if NBC were to cover a basketball game, it would have a satellite truck parked at the arena, beaming up to space. The satellite would then beam that down to Earth, allowing your local NBC station to might pick it up and broadcast it across its broadcast area. It was then up to your local station to insert commercials between breaks and other events. However, if you had a large dish satellite, you might occasionally be able to pick up those raw feeds, which you would supposedly sound rather than getting the footstool. I went to place the ashtray in my hiding place on top of a high cabinet in my kitchen after finishing a hidden smoke one night because the commentators were basically seeing the cameraman and looking at random objects, etc. I'd have out of the way to avoid getting coated in ash or struck by the heavy glass ashtray because I was on my tiptoes and straining to place it there when I lost my balance and it slipped out of my fingers and fell to the floor. I heard it hit the ground behind me loudly and then it clattered as it rolled. I sighed, knowing that I would have to clean up the ash from the floor and feeling bad for being so clumsy. But when I turned around to see where I had heard it land, nothing was there. I would estimate that I spent around 30 minutes doing this, searching the kitchen for the ashtray or even a hint of ash on the floor, but nothing was there. It and its contents had just disappeared into thin air. I was so alarmed that night that I went to bed and checked again the following morning, but it was still gone, and I've never seen it again. Since 1994, when I was 5 years old and living on a farm in the southern Midwest, I had the greatest dog in the world, a huge yellow lab, who one day abandoned her and rushed outdoors. I followed her and watched her go. I had seen lots of coyotes, but this one towered over my lab and went toe-to-toe with a gray wolf in the cow pasture, where the cows were oddly nowhere in sight. At the time, that area was obviously not a wolf habitat. A minute or so later, he tilted his head and ran out into the woods, where he discovered all the cows at the other end of the pasture clustered around the coyotes. To let him know that this was not the thing that had snarled her darn head off in his face, when our two calves were lying down, my lab actually crawled over them and would pull on their tails. The cows gave no. I would go to my freaking grave and claim it was a wolf I witnessed, but no one seemed to mind. They were also not afraid of domestic dogs or coyotes. I've spent years studying wolves and wolf hybrids, so trust me when I tell you that every image I've seen of the animal and the paw prints he left behind indicates that he was much more wolf than coyote, dog, or even a combination. I observed a wolf close to my aunt and uncle's when there weren't supposed to be any wild wolves in Colorado. In 1994 or 1995, at a property outside of Divide, I saw thousands of coyotes, huskies, malamutes, and every type of large dog you can imagine. I know what those look like. I'm not sure if the wolf had escaped from somewhere or whatever, but it stared at me for a very long time before wandering off. Since people didn't really carry cameras back then, I can show you virtually exactly where. When I was perhaps 9 or 10 years old, I was sitting on the bay window in my room when I noticed something in the sky that was traveling straight up and covered in tiny dots of colored lights. This sighting occurred when it was even less built up than it is now. The hues were unfamiliar to me, so I leaped from the bed to get a pair of those plastic binoculars that everyone had as children. However, in the 5 seconds it took, it had shifted out of my field of vision, and my window allowed me to view the moment I was in the car with my mother. When I was around 15, I don't know if people can live without jaws, but I watched The Ring, and it scared the hell out of me. We were going down the street when we passed a bus stop and saw a woman sitting there, missing her lower jaw. Another one that comes to mind is our first family dog, a Jack Russell who was predominantly black with a white chest and some brown markings, and who used to lie in my parents' room when I was around 13. I was using the internet to talk on MSM because of where the PC was. I could see the door to my parents' room, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark shadow that looked like the dog running past the door. I like to assume that was his last visit to our home. While he was sleeping and moving about, you noticed hues that you didn't recognize. Did you see a new color since that doesn't seem possible? Yes, that happened around 20 years ago, and I couldn't even identify the shape of the car. The two main things that have stuck are going straight up at a reasonable speed and thinking that I don't know what color some of the lights are. Most of them are typical colors like red, blue, green, white, etc. But some I don't know what color they are. I think it was turquoise when I was living in Missouri in 2012 or 2013. I was feeding my hens when they started acting strangely and rushed inside their coop. I looked up and saw that this hue was more like no color I had ever seen before. I swear to God that I saw a pterodactyl. I saw it fly over my land, then over my neighbors, then across a tiny valley, and until it was completely out of sight. I couldn't have been more certain that it was just a pterodactyl. I don't often discuss it with anyone, with the exception of my wife and parents, whom I've told to trust me. I even started researching pterodactyl sightings and emailed a subject matter expert, who revealed that they are not as rare as most people believe. I begin to receive criticism. I am a completely normal 34-year-old man with no history of mental health issues, who has maintained a successful profession for the previous 10.5 years. Other than my word edit, I have no proof that I saw a pterodactyl. I checked my email, and it was sent at 2:15 p.m. on January 2, 2013, because of the diamond-shaped tail end, which I mentioned later to someone else. Edit to show that it was a pterosaur rather than a pterodactyl. Noted, and I verified through the aforementioned email that my dad claims to have seen one, too. He claims to have seen it sitting in a tree in Missouri, which my brother and I assumed was a running joke, but he is 100% serious, and I am 100% serious as well. During my teenage years, I was watching a movie alone in a TV room with 2 chairs divided by a couch. I was seated in the chair on the right, and at one point, I started laughing so hard at the movie that I heard someone else chuckle, and noticed what appeared to be a girl my age, laughing uncontrollably in the other chair, which was strange since it didn't scare me. It just felt good to laugh with others. Then, realizing that I was the only person in the house and that the chair was empty, I turned off the TV and went outdoors, which is something similar to this. When I was about 6 years old, I was watching a TV show in the TV room while my mother was in her bedroom. At the end of the hallway, I was sitting on a couch when I noticed an elderly woman observing, and I started to feel like someone was watching me. The problem is that, as you mentioned, I wasn't afraid. Rather, I just felt as though she was taking care of me and was confused. When she knows I'm watching, she turns around and jogs towards my mom's room, and just as she is ready to enter, she disappears. Sorry for the poor English. I'm not a native speaker. When she vanished, I was at the Shed Aquarium in Chicago. I approached the cuttlefish tank, and for some reason, all 20 or so of the fish swarmed to me. I traveled the entire length of the large tank, which was perhaps 10 feet long, and they followed me. I walked back, and they followed. A few other people watched and tried it as well, but unfortunately, the cuttlefish only had eyes for me. My best guess as to why. Doppelganger might have also been the color of your shirt. I work at an aquarium, and because I wear the uniform, the creatures frequently get excited when they see me. I've been told that cuttlefish are colorblind, and this is due to the color of my shirt, which I've been editing for months. Disregarding my theory, I made a really wonderful buddy in the military, but after 4 years I left him. One day, after years of not thinking about him, I was strolling around my city's center when I found out, God forbid, he passed me. I followed him, but it was someone else. Curious, I looked up war on terror memorials and discovered that he had been killed in a shooting abroad just a few days prior. It seemed like a split second when he passed me on the street. When I was 5 years old, I enjoyed mixing different liquids and playing chemistry. I suppose my grandmother allowed me to play with all of them. At that moment, our eyes connected, but I didn't recognize who it was until he had already mentally passed me. If I had combined ammonia with bleach, for instance, I swear I would have made a white liquid that generated a single black bubble that would emerge to the surface. I just understood now that this would have been deadly. I mixed her shampoos, lotions, cleaning supplies, etc. No one believes me, or perhaps no one cares. So I suppose it's not that cool. When I was a kid, I touched a strange pest plant in our garden, and I think it stung me. For a brief while, I thought everything was inverted. Afterward, things returned to normal. I was so shocked that I couldn't explain it to my mother, so I just walked to her in tears. You most likely touched a bug mania, which is high in scopolamine and can make you see things that aren't there. Inverse colors are a common hallucination from did you have large orange blooms that hang down in your music? Brugmansia a common garden flower despite their effects, because only young children will be impacted by touch alone. During a lunch in the garden at nightfall near an airfield in San Antonio in 1996 or 1997, my girlfriend and I noticed a space shuttle land and swiftly take off without anyone else nearby. I was disappointed because there wasn't much air traffic generally. A large Air Force transport that would land there, but on this specific evening there wasn't. And then I noticed something approaching very quickly and steeply. I knew it was a shuttle before it landed, but it was an unidentified spacecraft literally. It had no markings. Before my sister was born, I remember that it was picked up by one of those tow truck rigs and carried straight to a hangar. The doors were quickly closed, and there was no press or anything. It wasn't until later that I learned about the CIA Blue Space program. Although my sister is 4 years older than I am, we both grew up with this cat, who occasionally followed and watched over us. My parents used to joke about how she thought of us. When they found a kitten, they chose to keep it because they couldn't locate an owner, so they named her Princess. It took many people a long time to discover that my sister wasn't only mean to me as her kitten, she was also abusing and bullying me severely. My sister is a narcissist, but you don't need to know that when I was too little to comprehend what was going on. When I used to chat with Princess, she was like my own diary. I would sit with this elder creature and tell her everything that was bothering me. One day, in a store, my mom promised to get us each a lolly, but my sister wanted a different one. So she grabbed my arm and clawed her. When we came home, I went to the Princess and explained how afraid I was. After a time, I calmed down and began to play with my toys. A few minutes later, I heard a shriek, and my nails went down so hard that it drew blood. I was terribly upset. After walking up and scratching my sister's hand, she growled at her before returning to sit with me and watch over me while I played with my toys. My parents thought she was provoked, but I know she left the room immediately after I'd been chatting to her, and entered immediately after a shriek. I can't prove it, but I believe Princess recognized my fear and promised to protect me. I haven't mentioned my white and gray guardian to anyone, aside from my current cat, and I haven't given Princess much thought in a long time. I adore the cat, and it's funny since my new cat was originally my sister's. She acquired him and left him with my parents, but she lived with them for 19 years. Depending on how old she was when they found her, he gradually became my own, preferring to sit with me over her. I was playing poker with some friends when I dealt, and somehow managed to deal a royal flush on the board, giving everyone a royal flush. This was long into our game, and the cards were undoubtedly properly shuffled. And don't forget that it also put the burned cards down. The chances of this happening are so slim that, aside from the friends I was playing with, nobody would think it happened and would think I was lying when I was 5 years old. There was something peaceful about it, so I wasn't afraid when I noticed the man sitting on the stairs watching me while I was sleeping. He observed me for what seemed like 10 minutes, and then he abruptly left. A few days later, I learned that my dad was murdered in Europe. I currently reside in Canada. My parents were divorced. I have photos of myself with him at birth, but he left soon after. So that's the only memory I have of him. I don't think ghosts exist, but I am aware of what I witnessed. My mom is the only person I've ever told. 4 years after her sister committed suicide, she would see her dead sister standing at the foot of her bed, observing her. It was usually calm and serene, and she claimed she enjoyed seeing her. But one night something didn't feel quite right. When I was around 20, my mother finally disclosed to me that she used to see my dad watching over me till one day. She urged him to leave and never return, saying she was afraid and yelling for her to leave. That's pretty strange. The chameleon jumped into a large mound of snow while my friend was handing it to me, and I searched for it for a long time, but I haven't seen it since that day. Footnote: this was roughly 2 years after his death. Couldn't find it, so I gave up. A few weeks later, the snow had melted, and I was outside when I discovered the lizard partially frozen to the ground. I peeled him off, placed him in one of those tiny plastic tanks, and placed it by my home's radiator within an hour or two. The lizard was bouncing around the cage as if nothing had occurred. It survived for a number of years and was known to my friend and me as Jesus the Resurrection Lizard. My brother misplaced his wallet and was retracing his steps, searching for it. A homeless man told him in a coffee shop, "Don't worry, it's in the bathroom sink. Your wallet is in your bathroom sink." Later that night, he did, in fact, find his wallet at home in the bathroom sink. And a few days later, he noticed the same thing. I was out for a stroll late one evening in rural Illinois when I thanked the homeless man for his assistance. The man became very irate and told my brother that he had never seen him before. It might have been a lucky guess, but I believe a narrative about a magical bum is better. I thought it was odd that there were squirrels standing in the center of the road, in the absence of anyone else, but as I approached, I saw that there were 3 squirrels gathered around a cat that was sleeping down. For a moment, I believed the cat was dead, but as I approached and passed them, the squirrels and cat followed me with their gaze, showing there was nothing to see here. To this day, I still find it strange. I was home alone for a while when my mom went to the neighbors to grab a book or something, and our German shepherd, who was 14 years old at the time, persuaded me to go outside with him and began licking my hands. This was when I was 10 years old. He glanced at me, fled, and jumped the gate, but he never returned. He was so good and loyal that no one believes me anymore and believes he was stolen, because he would never leave. I'm quite sure he did that because he didn't want us to see him die, and instead wanted to go to the huge forest area and do what he wanted to do. I miss you, buddy. Wow, these are some incredible responses. I'm happy to hear that all of our pets care about us in this way. Edit: for those of you who are wondering why no one believes a child about anything, that did happen frequently. At the time, we lived in Iran, and the dogs, especially the rare purebreds, were frequently stolen. My family believed this was the reason why I was by my mother's side when she died, and I swear that just before she left, I heard her and my grandmother, who had died in the 1980s, behind me. Mom said I looked terrible, and Grandma told me it was time to leave. I turned around, but the sun was shining through the window, and it was at that precise moment that Mom died. Wow, there's a lot more to the story. This is merely a brief synopsis of the last minute or so of that day. It was really strange. I'm not sure if my brain was making me see things that way or if it was really supernatural. If you don't mind sharing, here's what else happened. The whole story in detail once more. I've wondered if I made this up or if it actually happened, but either way, It's a very reassuring story to me about how Mom would like to be remembered. Mom had a rare genetic cancer, and in the last few months, we had run out of options. So ensuring her comfort was more of a challenge than hoping for a cure. When she decided it was time for hospice care on her last hospital stay, I accompanied her in the ambulance from the hospital to her home, where the amazing hospice nurses set up the living room with her bed, so she could spend her remaining time gazing out at the yard and her garden. I still get shivers and feel stressed when I think about it. I can't comprehend how they do their work. It seems so difficult. She was removing her from the ambulance at the house when one of them yelled to the other, "Don't go so fast." Thinking about that now, more than 10 years later, makes me sick. They nearly dropped her down the driveway, but instead, we rolled her into the house. Several of my aunts, uncles, and cousins were there at the house, and they were also helping to put things up. My uncle, who had suffered a stroke a few years prior, was sitting in the dining room with my mother, who was still recovering from chemotherapy, and I felt the need to throw up there. My mom's final words were, "Your uncle doesn't look well. Better get him a bucket." I was so accustomed to it that I would allow her to throw up in my hands. Her cancer was in her adenoids, and as a result, she had various speech and digestive issues. We were able to get her situated into it around 9 p.m. Everyone went home, and I unloaded my stuff in my bedroom. We agreed that I would stay for the first week, after which a sibling would come and take over for another week. Ensure Mom was as comfortable as possible all the way to the end. We all knew that it would only take a few days or hours, not weeks. Several times during the night, my dad would wake me up to assist in giving Mom some morphine, which was now not something I was unpleasant task. And by 2 a.m., the hospice nurses had reviewed everything. I contacted the hospice nurse since I was at a loss for what to do, and she answered the phone first, rang and said, "I've been waiting for you to call," adding that she would not worry about stopping every 6 hours, and that we should just give Mom the painkillers whenever she appeared to need them. Dad was still certain that we shouldn't overdo it, though, so fast forward to every few minutes that morning. As I was working on my computer next to Mom's bed, I caught a glimpse of a dog to dogs, maybe a cat sitting next to Mom. Nothing odd, but they hadn't owned a dog in 10 years at that point. Puppy and a cat, maybe 5. We had wonderful pets that were unquestionably a part of the family. I was thinking about that throughout the morning, and by 1:45 p.m., I was observing things that made Mom feel mostly at ease. Things began to go south once more, so I moved a chair to the foot of the bed so she could see me if her eyes were open. My aunt sat on one side of the chair, while my dad stood on her side, holding her hand. She was crying because no one was listening, and I've never forgiven her for that. Back behind the bed, my dad's strange, extremely devout cousin was shouting about Jesus and praying as though her intercession would finally end decades of cancer treatment. My grandmother, Dad's mother, could have been a substitute for on Golden Girls. Sophia was exactly the same height as the sun and glare, and everything felt warm and cozy. Then, at about 158, I heard a man say, "We're here to get you." But I didn't recognize him because my mom's father passed away the year before she and Dad were born. Got married, and then I heard my mother's voice behind me, saying how awful she looked, and the woman's voice, which sounded like my mom's mother, who passed away sometime in 1987, saying it was time to leave. I looked back, and another beam of light was coming through the window, but I saw shapes that the sunshine behind my sobbing aunt became much more bright at that moment, and I could hear my mother's voice clearly saying, "Let's go," as well. The light dimmed a little, and I glanced around to see if anyone else was moving. Look at Mom one final time. Her eyes were closed when she sat up in bed. She appeared to be sitting more than the color of her lips changed from pale pink to. She leaned back in bed, feeling blue. Departed, I checked the time, and it had to 06 p.m.